Listen closely. Right now, in construction sites all over the world, invisible reinforcement mistakes and deliberate lapping scams are silently working against the very properties we live and work in. I'm putting on my hard hat today and stepping in as your forensic structural engineer to expose a highly alarming threat. We're going to strip away the concrete, eliminate the fluff, and look at the raw, active mechanics of construction fraud. So if you own property or you're planning to, consider this your ultimate structural survival guide. Let's get right into it.
We have to start with a high-stakes question. What exactly causes these heavily engineered, seemingly invincible structures to suddenly turn into brittle, collapsing death traps under stress? Well, the answer is actually buried in the dark, hidden right inside your building's columns. And you can see the devastating reality of this right here, looking at the aftermath of the 1999 Turkey and 1995 Kobe earthquakes. See, concrete is great for handling compression, but it heavily lacks tensile strength. That is exactly what the hidden steel skeleton is for. When that steel framework is compromised and fails under seismic loads, the concrete doesn't just crack a little bit. No, it shatters entirely. The whole column just obliterates.
Which brings us to our first main point, the hidden steel problem. Or as I like to call it, how concrete permanently hides all sins. The terrifying thing about concrete is that the moment that gray slurry is poured and sets, your window for correction just slams shut. It's totally gone. On one hand, you might have a pristine, solid-looking finished exterior, but literally inches away, on the inside of an identical column, you could have a horrific hidden reality where exposed, failing rebar is just bursting through weak concrete. Shoddy practices get completely masked by plaster and paint, and suddenly incredibly dangerous structures are passing as absolute fortresses. What gets covered up cannot be corrected later. It's a fundamental truth of construction. By the time a mistake actually becomes visible to you, like a rust stain bleeding through or some spalling concrete, that structural damage has been accumulating for years. Every monsoon, every minor tremor has been quietly degrading your building. And let me tell you, the fix is not cheap. You're looking at massive, massive costs for column jacketing just to try and restore a building that was fatally compromised from day one. Now let's investigate the primary culprit behind so many of these sudden collapses, the lap splice threat, which creates devastating localized failure points. So what is a lap splice? Well, in the real world, steel bars just aren't infinitely long. When starter bars extending up from a footing need to connect to the main column steel, they have to overlap. That overlapping connection is the lap splice. And to safely transfer those massive tensile and compressive forces, they have to overlap by a very specific, carefully engineered length. We're usually talking 20 to 40 times the diameter of the bar itself. This entire connection relies absolutely on the mechanical interlocking of the steel ribs physically gripping the surrounding concrete.
Now, think about the mechanics of a 20-bar diameter lap splice. If a corrupt contractor decides to underlap this joint just to save a few inches of steel and pocket the difference, that joint completely loses its clamping action. It's practically useless. So, when an earthquake hits and the building is subjected to violent reversing loads, the concrete covering that splice spalls prematurely. The grip just vanishes. The splice slips, and boom, the column suffers a brittle, catastrophic failure. We also have to talk about inadequate cover and debonding. These are truly a building's silent killers. If workers get lazy and fail to stagger the lap positions, meaning they overlap all the steel bars at the exact same height, they are engineering a massive, concentrated weak zone. Add poor concrete cover into the mix, and that mechanical interlocking we just talked about fails completely. The bars debond during a quake, which effectively severs the building's spine right at its base.
But this disaster often begins way before the physical installation even starts. That brings us to supply chain quality fraud, and specifically, the paperwork scam.
Fraudsters absolutely exploit the market, using some very specific, calculated tactics. They know buyers are distracted and rarely actually verify the physical delivery against the paperwork. So what do? They supply lower-grade steel instead of what was specified. They use fake, altered, or reused test certificates without matching heat numbers. They'll pull a bait-and-switch with brand substitution at the literal last mile of delivery. Or they'll supply non-standard, re-rolled steel and underweight bars that fundamentally lack the critical mass required to actually hold up your roof.
And here is where the visual deception really gets you. Take Fe500 versus Fe550 SD. Now, those numbers refer to the yield strength of the steel. On a dusty, chaotic construction site, these bars look exactly the same. Identical. But if a supplier secretly downgrades you from an earthquake-resistant, high-ductility FE550 SD bar down to a standard FE500, they are severely gutting your building's capacity to absorb seismic shocks. It's basically an invisible pay cut to your structural integrity, right from day one.
Okay, moving on. Let's look at the physical execution on site, focusing on visible red flags and spotting construction fraud in real time.
Fraud out in the field usually involves deliberately using substandard materials just to skim profits. Think about poor quality materials like mortar mixed without nearly enough cement. In some extreme cases, like we've seen at certain hospital sites, the material is literally crumbling in the inspector's hands. It's failing and breaking apart before the building is even occupied. It's common sense, right? If the mortar can't even hold itself together, there is no way it's going to hold a building together.
And the execution errors don't stop there. When concrete is poured and inadequately vibrated, you get these massive structural weakening air holes, also known as honeycombing. Or think about displaced reinforcement. As concrete is poured from a height and workers are trampling all over the steel cages, those bars shift out of alignment. Sometimes unscrupulous builders even swap steel out for pieces of bamboo. If those shifted bars aren't fixed before the concrete sets, your structural elements are permanently locked into a highly vulnerable state.
So how do we stop this? Preventing the unseen disaster requires your strict on-site protocol.
When it comes to construction, you cannot rely on trust. You absolutely must rely on a strict verification protocol. So here is your survival checklist. 1. Physically verify the brand and grade embossed right there on the steel bars. 2. Demand the test certificates and make sure you match the heat numbers to the bundle tags. Don't just take their word for it. 3. Get a tape measure out and physically verify those lap lengths against the engineer's drawings. And 4. Confirm your cover blocks are correctly placed to guarantee adequate concrete cover. You execute these 4 steps, and you catch and reject fraudulent material before a single drop of concrete is poured.
We've uncovered a pretty terrifying reality today. From those brittle seismic failures, all the way to the lapping and paperwork scams that are just infesting the supply chain. Because what gets covered up can literally never be corrected. You've got to ask yourself right now, is your property built on verified structural integrity, or is it a hidden scam just waiting for a catalyst to fail? Take these tools we talked about today, inspect your sites, and demand exactly what you paid for. Stay vigilant and build safe.